Hire for character, hire for attitude. Everything else can be taught.
So often people think that the candidate accepts the job and the company hires the person, but really they're agreeing to more or less the same thing.
It's unfortunate that there are still people that take a point of view or they're lucky to have the job. Hold on a second. That's poor leadership. Your job as a leader is to develop more leaders. That's not going to help you develop more leaders. You're putting yourself in a position of authority and people don't like that. As a hiring manager, if I have a resume that comes across my desk and the resume looks awesome, and then I conduct an interview with the person and the interview is brilliant, that's a red flag for me. And the reason that's a red flag for me is because
my guest today is someone who, from just the few conversations that I've had with him, has already opened my eyes as a leader and communicator. Mike Irving is the founder of Advanced Business Abilities and has a 30-year career in business. Our conversation highlights Mike's unique perspective and expertise, including what the true singular purpose of leaders is intended to be. Mike also shares his thoughts around how to conduct an interview through prompting, and for candidates, why being nervous in an interview is actually a good thing. This was a really fun conversation and highly relevant to anyone in any industry. Mike Irving, good to see you. Thank you for being here. First of all, thanks again for your time in sharing your insights with my team last week. And because it was so helpful, I want to get right into one of my favorite quotes that I've heard in recent weeks and months. And it came from you, and it actually is a working definition of sales. Effective communication towards action and commitment. Elaborate more around what that means and give what your definition is.
Yeah, happy to, man. Sales, for a lot of people, sales is an icky word. They immediately think of the used car salesman, the slimy, sleazy, pushy, and that's nothing more than just really poor level sales skills. Mm-hmm. Sales is a skill that every human wants to develop. So my elongated definition is that the act of selling is effective communication between two people, the end result of which is that both of those people make commitments to take actions that provide benefit to both of those people. And then they actually do it. Like, that's the process of selling, right? And we all sell it all day, every day. Talk to anybody that has children, and I'll guarantee you those kids are really good at sales. When they want to go to McDonald's, man, they're turning it on, right? And every conversation between a set of life partners, the conversation about what we're going to do on Saturday night is a sales process. And that process has a set of models and principles that govern it. And when you understand those, man, you can make sales enjoyable for all parties, that it becomes effortless.
That's my favorite part of this working definition, right? I know you call it the working definition of sales, but it's really a working definition of communication. And that's why I wanted to lead with it today, because this is, sure, it's a podcast for the financial services industry, but the financial services industry is made up of individuals, some who do literal sales, but a bunch of individuals who communicate for a living, either with clients or colleagues or some form of interaction with other humans. And that's why I really like this, is because the takeaway is an effective way to move forward with those you are in business with or sharing a home with. That's why it was when you first said that to me, it was such a resonant line, and why I wanted to start with it and have you elaborate more. Because it applies to anyone in business, not just someone who's trying to get someone to buy a product.
Yeah, it does. And I'm reminded of another quote. I believe it's by George Bernard Shaw. And that is that the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it actually occurred. And that's very real, because often people think that they've communicated. And they may have said something, but that's not communication. Communication is where you've said something, and the party that you're saying it to, or the party that you're asking the question of, they hear it, they duplicate it so that it's totally understood. That's when you have communication. And all too often in sales, we fall prey to making assumptions. We fall prey to telling the prospect what we think they want to hear. And so what we don't do is make sure that we really understand them and their point of view. And that gets in the way of the principles, models, and systems that govern the process of sales actually working, so that you get both parties making commitments to take actions that they actually take.
Yeah. Not to repeat it completely, I just, the fact that it can apply to leaders at all levels, peers at all levels, right? I think that's what's so great about it. There's a omnipresence, a ubiquity in the statement. Going a first step further regarding leadership, I know, another thing, obviously this is what you are most experienced in and what you built your business around, but your line about the purpose of leaders and what they are intended to do, and maybe using the previous line and principle to get to that stage. But talk about, the job of leaders and what people should look out for.
The number one function of a leader is to create more leaders. A lot of people in a leadership position, they actually attempt to create followers. They look to create supporters. But in my opinion, that's the backwards way to go about it. If you're just creating followers and people who follow you, then those people are dependent on you. And what you're looking to do as a leader is you're looking to create people that you can depend on, and you're looking to create people who others can depend on. And so that those people will then create more leaders, and you then end up with a juggernaut, would be the technical term. If you continue to create great leaders, then you're going to build an unstoppable team.
You're originally a Massachusetts, Boston guy. I immediately think of the New England Patriots from when I was younger. When you say that, right? Leaders creating leaders. It's a really good line or vision to live by for somebody who might be in a leadership seat for the first time, or maybe whose remit has expanded significantly for the first time. Is there anything else or any tips you have on how to create leaders as somebody who's leading maybe for the first time, or who hasn't thought of it through this lens before?
Yeah, I think the simplest thing that I can say on that subject is that leadership is about intent and action. It's not a position. As a leader, you're not in a position of authority. You're in a position where you're looking to ensure that you develop the people on your team to be able to fulfill the vision that you've set, the remit that you've set or has been set for your organization. And so intent is a really big part of it. And the thing that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to leadership is emotional. They feel pressure, they feel degrees of anxiety and uncertainty. They, what's the buzzword that goes around now? Imposter syndrome. They don't feel like they deserve to be in the position. And that's all just, if I say negative self-talk, right? It's negative thinking. It's restrictive thinking. It doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve any of the people who you are looking to develop into leaders. And if you continue to struggle with any of that negative self-talk, then talk to somebody about it. Somebody who knows how to help you deal with it, because that's not going to support you to grow as a leader. And when and if you see anybody on your team who's dealing with that, hey, learn how to help with that. That's a really, really important part. Self-belief and making sure that you feel good about yourself and you can look at yourself in the mirror at the end of every day and be happy with what you see. That's going to help you be a better leader.
Since we first met, I've tried to apply actually both of these topics that we've talked about so far. And I think tying in the commitment of expectation in a position of leadership is actually hugely beneficial. Having a conversation and, as you say, right, rather than assuming intent, making sure that the other side or whoever I'm speaking with, whether it's someone on my team or a peer of mine, is fully clear in what the initiative I'm trying to lead, so that we can successfully achieve what I've brought to our attention. And to me, I'm embodying leadership in that I'm trying to drive an initiative, but I'm also embodying, what you mentioned, removing an expectation and agreeing to a commitment.
Yeah, expectations are, undiscussed agreements that we are in some way attempting to force onto someone else. And so my take on that is the best thing you can do is remove all expectations and turn them into clearly discussed and understood agreements. And an expectation is actually a break in communication. It's actually poor communication. Because if I've got an expectation, well, the moment that I talk about it, and if I'm smart, ask the other person to make a commitment to taking that action, well, now it's no longer an expectation, it's an agreement. That's a much easier way to approach the relationship.
Yes, you could almost replace expectation with assumption. And when you use assumption, that's a dirty word, right? If you just if you assume that everyone knows what you're talking about, or assume that everyone's going in the same direction as you, well, then you're probably going to end up not in the same place.
Yeah, you've hit a Y in the road, and you've assumed that this is the way we're going. But hey, they've assumed they're going that way, and the
Correct.
further you go down those Y roads, the further away you get.
So let's, as this is also a talent-related podcast, let's pivot the conversation a little bit to how to identify leadership, or how to just kind of apply some of the topics that we've discussed so far in a hiring environment. What are your thoughts on what leaders might be able to look for when hiring? And maybe on the other side, if you're a candidate, things to look for in a leader you might want to work for.
Yeah, I think I can probably talk about both of those sides at the same time, because they're actually really similar, right?
Yep, bring it on.
What is it that we're actually looking for? So if I'm the hiring manager, what is it I'm looking for in a candidate? I'm looking for somebody who's going to make commitments to take actions, and I'm looking for somebody who will actually do what they said they would do, right? Fundamentally, if we hire people that fit that definition, we're in good shape, aren't we? It's going to mean that the person's got probably a pretty good supportive attitude. It's going to mean that they're competent, so they understand what the job is, and they're able to go and apply themselves and produce results and get things done. I think that's important. Now, we could talk for hours about, as a hiring manager, how do you ascertain whether or not somebody fits that definition? You're not going to determine that from looking at a resume and conducting a half-hour interview. That's not going to happen, right? So there's lots of things that can be done there. But if you take a quick view from the other seat, as a candidate, what does somebody want? Well, as a candidate, they want leadership who's going to communicate well and be transparent. And they're looking for leadership that is about getting things done. And they're looking for people who are going to do what they said they would do. So it's actually the same equation. Now, slightly different ways of assessing that from each of those two positions. But if you really think through it, if you kind of logically and emotionally put yourself into the position of, all right, well, what are the indicators that tell me that this person is the type of person I want to work with? Then you'll start to develop a bit of a checklist and a set of things to pay attention for. And they're not always going to be super obvious. Like I've found that the most important things to pay attention to in life are the really subtle things, the subtle underlying indicators, the look on someone's face, or the way that their eyes dilate when they say something, that you just can sense, hold on, something's off here, something's not quite right. My advice is pay attention to that. So we can call that intuition, we can call it gut feel, we can call it, a sixth sense. There's lots of terms you can use, but that's a very real thing and really valuable to pay attention to and to develop within yourself.
Such insightful comments. And I think it's so interesting, if you really want to boil it down, that the candidate and the hiring manager are actually meeting at the exact same point, right? I think so often, and even in our business, right, we help create these marriages for a living dozens of times a day, right? Mm. But so often people think that the candidate accepts the job and the company hires the person, but really they're agreeing to more or less the same thing.
And they're both continuously evaluating not just during the interview, but in the first 3, 4, 5, 6 months of being on the job. In fact, I would actually even dare say the first 18 months. Like, so someone's not truly incorporated into a team, an organization, a role, and they're not really going to be performing as a top performer until they've been in the chair for 18 months. Like, there is nothing in the world that you can get involved in and within, 2 shakes of an eyelash, you're excelling at it. Mm-hmm. It takes time to develop skills. It takes time to become a part of a culture and a valuable member of a team. And so that evaluation process is happening right the way through. And remember that, like, as a hiring manager, it's unfortunate that there are still people that take a point of view called, oh, well, they're lucky to have the job. Hold on a second. That's poor leadership. Your job as a leader is to develop more leaders. And you're taking a point of view where people on your team are lucky to have the job and lucky to work for you. That's not going to help you develop more leaders. You're putting yourself in a position of authority, and people don't like that.
You made a comment once, and this is actually a decent transition to that. You said something about that it's okay to be nervous in an interview. And to that point that you just made, right? Like, if someone is giving off the vibe of, well, you're lucky to be here, those aren't necessarily good nerves. But as a hiring manager, if you're paying attention, there might be some positives in nerves. And if you're a candidate, there's might be a way to positively embrace those nerves. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So if I talk about it this way, as a hiring manager, if I have a resume that comes across my desk and the resume looks awesome, like, oh, this could be perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And then I conduct an interview with the person, and the interview is like brilliant. That's a red flag for me. And the reason that's a red flag for me is because, and not every time, like I don't just go, nah, that person just seems too good to be true.
Too confident. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a red flag because that there's a very high potential that person has paid a professional to write their resume for them and tailor it to your job ad and your company. Number 2, they've paid professionals to train them on how to interview. And most hiring managers don't get trained on how to interview well. And so that person, great resume, awesome in the interview, we hire them, and 18 months later, we wonder what happened. How did this go so wrong? Right? Whereas for me, if I see a resume, it's like, okay, well, the resume could look better. It's got the stuff I want on there. So let's interview the person, right? And then in the interview, the person's a bit nervous. And if I ask them about, hey, look, you seem a little bit nervous. Look, you're right, I am. I've not had an interview in 12 years. I've worked at the same place for the last 12 years now, and I'm nervous about leaving. It's a big jump, and I haven't practiced for interviews. So yeah, thank you. I am nervous. That's a good indicator for me.
It's a good indicator, but it doesn't necessarily mean good indicator of poor performance or a bad interview.
Not at all. No. In fact, quite the opposite. Again, there's a lot of detail that I put into conducting an interview or, helping hiring managers to become more proficient at interviews. But, apart from the extra detail I'm talking about, I like to see those things because, hey, that person's modest. They've been somewhere for a long time, which means that they went through the process of becoming a really valuable member of that team. They've performed because they haven't been removed from the role. Well, that's the type of person I want. That's what I'm looking for.
Exactly. It's a positive vulnerability. Yeah, I'm actually a little nervous because it's been a while, but I also really care about this. I'm showing you that I'm nervous because I really don't want to mess this up because it's important to me. Your perspective is that shouldn't be a reason to disqualify somebody, but rather the opposite.
100%. Yeah. It's actually an indicator to ensure that you really listen and pay attention and understand what the person's concerns are. What is it that they're nervous about? They might be sitting there going, well, look, I've been somewhere for 12 years. And so if I make a decision to join a new company, I'm in my mind making a 10 or 12 year commitment. I'm not going to go about that lightly. So yeah, I am a bit nervous because I want to make sure I really understand what you guys are about, and are you the type of culture that I'm going to really fit in with? Like, I don't do politics well. I'm not interested in that. So if there's lots of politics, I want to know that, because I'm not going to say yes to that. Those things are super valuable. You're looking for the character of the person. Hire for character, hire for attitude. Everything else can be taught. Character, attitude, and competency. General competency, not specific or technical competency. If a person is generally competent, they can learn how to do anything they want to learn.
So this leads me to the last question I want to ask you for today, at least, because Lord knows I have hundreds of other questions that I want to ask you for other hours of time. Keeping with the interview theme and the hiring theme, but again, from switching it now to the hiring manager perspective, you also said something about how to create, I guess, what we've called revelatory interviews or interview questions that reveal. Give an example and say a little bit more about that for the hiring manager listening.
I'll use an analogy to explain what I'm going to talk about first. And the analogy is you watch people get into street fights sometimes. And when you see somebody who's in a street fight, if there's one person that's never been trained to fight and the other person has been trained to fight, it's end of all over Red Rover in no time. Why? Because the guy who doesn't know how to fight, he telegraphs that his punch is coming. He winds up and it takes half an hour for his fist to come around. And the guy who's been trained to how to fight literally knows how to just step back in, pop, and it's over. It's done, right?
Yep.
Hiring managers are like the untrained fighter when they ask interview questions often. So what they'll do is they'll ask a question like, so tell me a time when you had a disagreement with your last boss, and what did you do to fix it? That's a terrible question, because you're telling the person that you're interviewing the way that you want them to answer. So you're not going to get any attitudinal or character traits revealed, because you've told them that you want them to tell you how they handled that problem.
Exactly.
If you just ask, so tell me about a time when you had a disagreement with your boss. And then shut up.
Yeah.
Yep. Just stop. Listen. Be comfortable with silence. If somebody starts talking to you and they go, well, yeah, look, I had a couple of disagreements in my last role, and that was really valuable because it taught me to not just give in. It taught me to hold my position. And, my boss and I really worked hard, and we learned how to communicate through differences of opinions. And it was super valuable for me. And I really respect my last boss because they helped me and allowed me to do that. Well, that's got some character behind it.
Yeah.
Another option of what you might hear is the person goes, oh, yeah, look, well, my last boss, man, he was an absolute real pain in the bum. Like, he just was overbearing and just micromanaged all the time, and it was just terrible. And that's not such a good indicator.
One of them is solutions oriented and shows an ability to naturally overcome. And the question, or the prompt, I should say, because it's more of a prompt than a question. The question is the second part that we're eliminating. The prompt is the part that's going to reveal what you should be looking for as a hiring manager.
Yeah, and it will only reveal that if you pay attention to it. So again, this brings it back to what we spoke about earlier. It's about paying attention to the subtleties that occur in communication. And when you pay attention to those subtleties, there's so much more information and intuition that you'll have access to. And that begins by you being completely present. The ability to be present in the moment and just there for that conversation, giving your full attention to that conversation. That's the starting point.
I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation.
Cool.
So thank you yet again for your willingness to share such broad and beneficial insights. You must be getting your knowledge from somewhere. So what kind of books are you reading? What's something that you've read recently that you've liked? What's a podcast other than Searching Smarter, of course, that you're listening to? And how are you, how are you finding time to stay educated, informed, and entertained in those mediums?
I'll share 2 books that I think are really, really helpful and valuable for anybody to read. And this isn't going to just apply to hiring and hiring managers. These are just generally 2 books that I think are fantastic.
Yep.
The first one is called Humans Are Underrated. And the author there is Jeff Colvin. And that's a spectacular book. He talks about the changes that we're already seeing right now with AI and robotics, etc., and how much that is going to impact the jobs that people have. So there are going to be lawyers who have been lawyers but will no longer be lawyers because they've got computers and robots and automation that will determine the success or potential success of a case. So humans aren't going to do that. And there will still be lawyers because humans don't want to get told a message that's that important to them by a robot. So who will be the most valuable lawyers? The ones with the best human interaction skills. And the whole rest of the book is dedicated to, okay, so if that's what's going to make the humans valuable, how do you develop those? So fantastic book. The other book I really strongly recommend is Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. And Napoleon Hill is really well known for Think and Grow Rich. I actually rate his other book, Outwitting the Devil, better than Think and Grow Rich.
Okay. I'm actually writing these down myself, by the way.
Cool. They're both great books. I absolutely rate them. They are fantastic.
That's a great place to end. Thank you so much again. Great to see you, Mike. And I hope we will have another conversation and discussion very soon.
And I have no doubt we will. Thanks very much for having me, and I hope that this has been valuable to anybody who's listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.
That's all for today's episode of Searching Smarter. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, keep searching smarter.